The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning inside the dining room of the Ashford family home in Oakville, Ontario, while the woman who had been planning it for months sat close enough to smell Celeste's perfume, still on the chair she had just been asked to leave. Celeste Marek Ashford, 37 years old, senior partner at a boutique heritage property firm she had built quietly over 11 years, stood in the hallway of a house that had her name on no deed but her fingerprints on every wall. She had repainted the study herself. She had chosen the kitchen tiles. She had spent 3 weekends stripping the original hardwood floors because Warren said he loved the grain underneath. Warren Ashford, 41, third-generation owner of Ashford & Sons Development, handed her the envelope without looking up. His mother, Miriam Ashford, 66, stood near the fireplace with her hands folded, as though she were witnessing something civilized. The other woman, Tara Solis, 32, who had been Warren's project coordinator for 14 months, sat on the couch in a cream blouse, ankles crossed, watching with the careful neutrality of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Celeste did not cry. She took the envelope, looked at it once, set it on the side table beside the lamp she had bought at an estate sale in Prince Edward County, and walked out. She did not look back at any of them. That was in March. By October, none of them fully understood what they had done. Warren Ashford had not always been the kind of man who did things like this. That was the version of the story Celeste had told herself for a long time, and it was the version that made the most sense when she was still inside the marriage. He had been different when they met. She believed that, or she had believed it enough to build 11 years around it. They met when Celeste was 25 and working as a junior consultant for a city planning firm in Hamilton. Warren was already running the development company his grandfather had founded, carrying it with the particular weight of inherited responsibility. He was charming in the way of men who have always been told they are charming, attentively, specifically, as though you were the only room in a building he had decided to restore. He noticed what other people missed. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered the names of her colleagues and her cat, and the street she had grown up on in Guelph. She fell in love with his attention before she understood that his attention was a resource he allocated based on what he needed. For the first few years he needed her. Celeste was sharp in ways Warren was not. She had an instinct for heritage properties, buildings with complicated pasts, overlapping ownership histories, municipal designations that made development legally thorny. Warren's company had momentum and capital. Celeste had the kind of judgment that turned complicated into valuable. They worked together on 2 projects before they married, and in both cases her reading of the site saved them from decisions that would have been expensive to reverse. After the wedding, she stepped back from consulting to manage their shared projects quietly from the side. She told herself it was a choice, that she preferred it that way, that there was dignity in building something together even when her name was not on the sign. Miriam Ashford had made clear early and without subtlety that she did not consider Celeste a particularly good match for her son. Not the right family, not the right background. The Marek name, she said once at a family dinner with the pleasant tone of someone discussing weather, didn't carry much in this province. Warren had laughed it off. Celeste had stored it somewhere behind her sternum and never quite let it go. She kept working. Not for Warren, not officially. 8 years into their marriage, she had incorporated her own firm. Marek Heritage Consulting, registered quietly under a numbered company, operating through a name that would not immediately connect back to the Ashford family. She told Warren it was a small side practice. She described it as consulting work she did occasionally, small contracts, nothing serious. He nodded and went back to whatever spreadsheet was open on his screen. He did not ask follow-up questions anymore. The firm grew without his attention, the way things sometimes grow when no one is watching them too closely. Celeste was careful and deliberate. She brought in a partner, a woman named Saucer, who had spent 15 years in municipal heritage law and understood exactly which properties in southern Ontario were about to become worth fighting over. Together they built a portfolio that was, by the time Warren handed Celeste that envelope, substantial enough to be described in certain circles as formidable. She had not hidden it out of deception. She had hidden it out of exhaustion. Every time she had tried to tell Warren about a project she was proud of, he had redirected the conversation towards something in his own world. She had stopped trying. The firm became her private country, the place she went when the house in Oakville felt like a performance of a life that no longer fit. She had not planned for it to become relevant in the way it did. That part, she would tell Sauers later, was almost entirely Miriam's fault. The property at the center of it was called Fenwick Mill, a 19th-century industrial complex on the edge of a heritage conservation district in West Hamilton, roughly 8 kilometers from the neighborhood where Celeste had grown up. The original mill had been converted to mixed use in the 90s, but the conversion had been done poorly. The ownership had fragmented over decades, and by the time it came to market it was carrying a designation dispute, 2 competing liens, and a municipal heritage overlay that made conventional development effectively impossible without years of committee work. Warren wanted it badly. Ashford and Sons had been trying to position itself in the Hamilton market for 3 years. Warren believed Fenwick Mill was the project that would establish them there, the kind of anchor development that announced seriousness. He talked about it at dinner. He talked about it on the phone. He brought the site maps home and spread them on the kitchen table, and Celeste listened, asked questions she already knew the answers to, and said nothing about the fact that her firm had been tracking Fenwick Mill for 18 months. The designation dispute was the problem. Heritage Ontario had flagged the main building for potential provincial protection, which would cap what a developer could do with the interior significantly. Warren's legal team had been trying to navigate around it for months. His project coordinator, Tara Solis, who had joined the company the previous spring, had apparently been leading that effort, and had apparently been doing other things as well, though Celeste had not confirmed that suspicion until she found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket she had taken to the dry cleaner. She did not confront him. She confirmed it quietly through channels she did not explain to him or to anyone. And then she made a decision. She did not make the decision out of anger. She made it out of clarity. There is a difference, and Celeste had spent enough years in rooms where she was underestimated to understand the distinction precisely. She accelerated the Fenwick Mill acquisition. Marek Heritage Consulting, operating through a subsidiary called Sable River Holdings, a name Celeste had chosen months earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with the coming divorce, made a formal offer on the Fenwick Mill property in early February. The offer was structured in a way that resolved both the lien dispute and the heritage overlay in one motion. Because Celeste had spent 8 months building a relationship with the chair of the Hamilton Heritage Advisory Committee and understood exactly what the designation required. The offer was accepted in 3 weeks. Warren did not find out until the April meeting of the Hamilton Development Coalition, 6 weeks after he had handed Celeste the divorce papers in the dining room of the house in Oakville. She had moved into a rental apartment in Westdale by then, a second-floor unit in a converted Victorian on a street lined with silver maples. It was small, it was entirely hers. She had brought almost nothing from the house except her files, her coffee maker, her grandmother's quilt, and the lamp from Prince Edward County. Warren had the house. Miriam had approved of that arrangement, which meant Warren had accepted it without argument. Tara Solis had been photographed by a neighbor moving boxes into the garage before the ink on the separation agreement was dry. Celeste had signed the papers without hiring a combative lawyer. Her legal counsel, a quiet man named Elliot, who had been recommended by Sayase, advised her gently that she was leaving money on the table. She told him she was not interested in the table. He looked at her in a way that suggested he suspected she had another table somewhere. She did. The settlement gave Warren full control of the Oakville property, a division of their joint accounts that was technically equitable and practically uninteresting, and a clean separation from any projects they had worked on together. It gave Celeste the same. Neither of them had listed Marek Heritage Consulting as a marital asset, because Warren did not know what it was worth, and because his lawyer had not thought to ask about the numbered company behind it. Elliot had made sure of that, quietly. In the weeks after the separation, Celeste worked. She worked the way she always worked when the rest of her life was too loud, with complete concentration, early mornings and long evenings, coffee cooling at her elbow while she reviewed site assessments and committee submissions. The Fenwick Mill project moved into its next phase. Salsa managed the contractor relationships. Celeste handled the heritage designation application, which was the piece that required someone who understood both the legal language and the history of the building itself. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. It was the part of her life that had never depended on Warren's attention to exist. She thought about him sometimes in the evenings, not with longing that had emptied out somewhere in the last 2 years of the marriage, slowly and then completely, like water finding a drain. She thought about him with something closer to archaeology, trying to understand when exactly it had shifted. When the man who had asked follow-up questions had decided she was not worth asking. She thought Miriam had accelerated it, but she thought the seed had always been there. Some men find a woman's competence attractive when it is useful to them and threatening when it is not. Warren had crossed that line so gradually she had almost not noticed. Almost. The Hamilton Development Coalition met quarterly in a conference room at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. It was the kind of gathering where people wore good coats and used each other's first names with the particular ease of people who saw each other often enough to feel like colleagues without quite being friends. Warren Ashford had been a member for 4 years. He considered it useful, which was the way Warren considered most things. He walked in that April evening with Tara Solis, who had begun attending these events as his guest since February. She was good in rooms like this, confident without being aggressive, attractive without demanding acknowledgement. Warren had noticed with some satisfaction that people received her well. He had not told many people about the divorce. He had not hidden it, exactly. He had simply not raised it, and in the circles they moved in, people were too polished to ask directly. The presentations that evening were routine until the fourth one. A project overview delivered by a woman Celeste's lawyer had recommended to the Fenwick Mill Consortium as a heritage communications specialist. Her name was Arden, and she was thorough and clear, and halfway through her remarks she referred to the lead firm on the project as Marek Heritage Consulting. Warren looked up. He looked up the way a person looks up when they hear a sound in a room that is supposed to be empty. Arden described the firm's approach to the heritage designation, the methodology, the committee work, the way the acquisition had been structured to simultaneously resolve the lien dispute. Warren knew all of these as problems he had been trying to solve for months. He had paid his own legal team considerable money to find solutions that Arden was now describing as already solved, already filed, already accepted. Marek, he thought. That was Celeste's name, her family name, the one Miriam had dismissed at that dinner years ago. He did not say anything during the presentation. He did not say anything during the reception afterward, when he poured himself a glass of wine and stood near the windows overlooking King Street and tried to organize what he was feeling into something he could name. Tara found him there and asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. He was not fine. He was standing in a room full of colleagues, holding a wine glass, beginning to understand that the company that had acquired the property he had wanted most, the property his own team had been unable to unlock, was run by his former wife. The wife he had handed divorce papers to in March. The wife he had not asked enough questions about in approximately 6 years. He left early. He called Celeste the next morning. She saw his name on the phone and set it face down on her desk and let it ring. He called again that afternoon. She answered on the fourth ring in the flat, polite voice she had developed for conversations she had no interest in prolonging. "I saw the Fenwick Mill presentation," he said. "I heard it went well," she said. A pause. "That's your company?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "Since when?" "A while." She moved a file on her desk, not because she needed to, but because she preferred to do something with her hands. 8 years, roughly. He said nothing for a moment. She could hear him breathing and knew the sound of him processing information that disrupted the version of things he had decided was true. "Never told me," he said. "I tried to," she said. "A few times." "Celeste." "Warren." Her voice was still polite. "Is there something you need, or is this a personal call? Because if it's personal, I'd prefer you go through Elliot." "I wanted to understand." "I know what you wanted," she said. "You wanted Fenwick Mill. You've wanted it for 3 years. I wanted it too. I got it. That's the whole story." He said something then that she found interesting. He said, "My mother was wrong about you." She thought about this for a second. "Your mother was consistent," Celeste said. "She told you what she thought of me from the beginning. The mistake wasn't hers." She ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of the Westdale apartment, the silver maples moving outside the window in the April wind. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt for the first time in a long time exactly the size of the space she actually occupied. The part of the story that circulated through certain Hamilton and Oakville circles over the following weeks was compressed, as these stories always are, into its most satisfying shape. Celeste Marek had been pushed out of her marriage by a difficult mother-in-law and a faithless husband, and had quietly, without announcement, built a company that ended up buying the property her husband had staked his professional reputation on. Justice, people said. Karma, people said. The fuller version was less clean and more true. Celeste had not built her company in order to beat Warren. She had built it because she needed something that was entirely hers, and she had found, in the particular problems of heritage properties, the buildings people had given up on, the ones with complicated histories and difficult designations, a kind of work that made sense to her in a way her marriage had eventually stopped making sense. She had not acquired Fenwick Mill to humiliate him. She had acquired it because her firm was positioned to solve problems his firm could not, and because the building was remarkable, and because no one had offered her a reason not to. The humiliation was incidental. Warren had provided that himself by not paying attention. Cyrus threw a small party in June at the Fenwick Mill site to celebrate the heritage designation being formally approved. The main hall of the old mill had been cleared of the construction debris from the failed 90s renovation, and someone had hung lights along the original timber beams. It was, Celeste thought, a beautiful room. The kind of room that had survived because someone had decided a long time ago that it was worth saving. About 30 people came. Colleagues, municipal contacts, the committee chair from Heritage Hamilton, who had been so essential to the designation. Elliot came and brought his wife, and stood in the corner, making the contented face of a man who had suspected something good would happen and turned out to be right. Celeste wore a dark green dress she had bought herself in April, the week after the phone call with Warren. She drank one glass of wine and ate something small, and talked to people she genuinely liked about a building she genuinely cared about. Near the end of the evening, the committee chair, a woman named Frances, who had been working in heritage preservation for 30 years and missed nothing, came to stand beside Celeste near the east windows. "Your husband tried to develop this site," Frances said. She did not phrase it as a question. "My former husband," Celeste said. "Yes." Frances looked around the room, at the lights, the beams, the people talking easily in the warm space. "He would have gutted it," she said. "He would have tried," Celeste said. "He didn't have the designation sorted." "You did." "I did." Frances raised her glass slightly. "The building owes you something." Celeste looked up at the beams. The original timber, 200 years old, solid in a way that had outlasted every plan anyone had made for the space beneath it. "I think we're even," she said. She meant it. She was not keeping score anymore. The score had resolved itself, the way these things do when a person stops waiting for someone else to notice their value and simply continues, quietly and without permission, to build. Outside the mill, the Hamilton evening was soft and lit, and entirely indifferent to Warren Ashford, who was somewhere in Oakville with a woman who had watched Celeste walk out of a dining room in March and had not once wondered what she was walking toward. That was the difference between them, in the end. Celeste always knew where she was going. She had just stopped explaining it to people who weren't listening.